Years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget, oil is finally flowing through Canada's Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. But even as that milestone is reached, another pipeline, long thought dead, is suddenly back in the headlines. Donald Trump, in his bid for a second term, is talking about reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. This was no small project. It was a proposed mega pipeline stretching from Canada's vast tar sands to American refineries, promising to deliver more than 800,000 barrels of crude oil every single day. Supporters once claimed it could have solved America's energy needs. Critics called it an environmental disaster waiting to happen. The project was canceled in 2021, dismantled in parts, and written off as a relic of the past. But now, Trump says he wants it built, fast. Could a revival of Keystone XL really happen? Would it end America's dependence on foreign oil, or is it just political theater? Before we can answer those questions, we need to understand what Keystone XL was, why it died, and why Trump is trying to bring it back to life now. Trump isn't just floating the idea, he's making a promise. He says that if Keystone XL is brought back, his administration would grant quick approvals, cutting through years of red tape. Alberta's Premier, Danielle Smith, was quick to cheer him on, calling the cancellation a mistake and arguing that the pipeline would mean lower fuel costs for American families. The original plan was, well, pretty ambitious. A $9 billion project that would move 830,000 barrels of heavy crude oil each day from Alberta's tar sands all the way down to refineries along the U.S. Gulf Coast. From there, the refined fuel could flow out to markets around the world. But, the history of Keystone XL is actually pretty messy. It was first proposed back in 2008, debated for over a decade, and ultimately halted in 2021 after President Joe Biden revoked a crucial cross-border permit. The owner, TC Energy, just walked away completely. Parts of the system were dismantled and key U.S. permits expired. Now Trump is telling pipeline companies to, quote, come back to America and start building. But here's the thing. TC Energy has made it clear they're just not interested. Another major player, South Bow Corporation, also said no, pointing out that after more than a decade chasing the project, they've simply moved on. With no willing builder and no active permits, Trump's pitch is really starting from almost zero. Yet, even with all these roadblocks, the political push is getting attention, and that's where trade tensions make the story even more complicated. Here's where things get tricky. On one hand, Trump says America needs Canadian oil and wants Keystone XL built. On the other hand, he's pushing steep tariffs on Canadian imports, including a planned 10% tax on crude oil. That's like inviting your neighbor over for dinner, then charging them to walk through your front door. On one hand, Trump says America needs Canadian oil and wants Keystone XL built. On the other hand, he's pushing steep tariffs on Canadian imports, including a planned 10% tax on crude oil. That's like inviting your neighbor over for dinner, then charging them to walk through your front door. These tariffs aren't just about oil. Trump has framed them as leverage to pressure Canada and Mexico on border security and drug trafficking, especially the fight against fentanyl. While Canada isn't a major source of fentanyl, it has still pledged tougher security measures to avoid an immediate trade clash. Even so, tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods are set to hit soon, with energy taxes delayed only until early March. So, what's the bigger picture here? Well, Trump wants tariffs that match or even exceed what other countries charge the United States, including, hidden costs like subsidies and value-added taxes. But honestly, those moves risk sparking retaliation from Canada, Mexico, and even Europe, and that could potentially ignite a broader trade war. And here's the contradiction that industry experts just can't ignore. How can you convince a country to send you more oil through a multi-billion-dollar pipeline when you're, at the same time, making it more expensive for them to sell you that oil? From a business standpoint, the revival of Keystone XL faces a mountain of skepticism. Richard Masson, an executive fellow at the University of Calgary, summed it up plainly. It's inconsistent to push for Canadian oil imports while slapping Canada with tariffs. The mixed signals make investors nervous, and in the pipeline industry, uncertainty is poison. Companies think in decades, not election cycles. To build something like Keystone XL, they need firm guarantees that it won't be killed by the next administration. But history has already proven the opposite. 2 different U.S. presidents have canceled the project. That's a $9 billion gamble no one is eager to take. Canada's federal government has said it's open to productive conversations about the pipeline, but it won't commit without a strong private sector backer. And right now, no company has raised its hand. The Canadian side of the route already has its permits and infrastructure in place, but the U.S. side would have to start almost from scratch. Then there's the question of oil supply. To justify new pipeline capacity, oil sands producers must commit to decades of steady shipments. But with volatile prices, environmental pressures, and a slower pace of new oil sands projects, many producers aren't really ready to sign on the dotted line. Without those long-term commitments, even the best political promises just can't get shovels in the ground. Keystone XL was designed as a massive 1,900-kilometer extension of the existing Keystone pipeline system. It would start in Hardisty, Alberta, cut through Montana and South Dakota, connect to a key hub in Steel City, Nebraska, and then link to the Gulf Coast refineries in Texas. From there, much of the refined product would be exported overseas. It would start in Hardisty, Alberta, cut through Montana and South Dakota, connect to a key hub in Steel City, Nebraska, and then link to the Gulf Coast refineries in Texas. From there, much of the refined product would be exported overseas. So, the project had 2 main parts. The southern leg, which runs from Cushing, Oklahoma all the way down to Port Arthur, Texas, was actually completed, and it's now known as the Gulf Coast Pipeline. The northern leg, stretching from Alberta to Nebraska, was the controversial section. This part faced years of legal and political battles, honestly. Proposed way back in 2008 by TC Energy, which was then called TransCanada, Keystone XL was designed to transport heavy crude from Canada's oil sands. And that's, by the way, one of the most carbon-intensive types of oil in the world. Supporters said it would boost North American energy security and create jobs. On the other hand, critics argued that much of the oil would never actually reach American gas pumps, and that the environmental costs would be, well, severe. Environmental reviews under both the Obama and Trump administrations concluded that the project wouldn't lower United States gasoline prices. In fact, the main beneficiaries would likely be oil companies selling on global markets, not average American drivers. Keystone XL wasn't just controversial because of politics. The environmental risks were huge. The oil it was designed to carry, called tar sands crude, is thicker, more acidic, and more corrosive than conventional oil. That makes it harder to move through pipelines and increases the chance of leaks. And when tar sands oil does spill, it's far more difficult to clean up because it sinks in water rather than floating on the surface. The oil it was designed to carry, called tar sands crude, is thicker, more acidic, and more corrosive than conventional oil. That makes it harder to move through pipelines and increases the chance of leaks. And when tar sands oil does spill, it's far more difficult to clean up because it sinks in water rather than floating on the surface. History has already shown what can go wrong. Since the original Keystone pipeline came online in 2010, it has leaked more than a dozen times. In one case, a rupture in North Dakota sent more than 378,000 gallons of crude spilling into the environment. Another spill shot a 60-foot geyser of oil into the air. These incidents fueled fears that a leak along Keystone XL's route could contaminate major water sources. One of the biggest concerns was the Ogallala Aquifer, which supplies drinking water to millions of people and irrigates nearly 1/3 of America's farmland. A major spill there could be catastrophic for farms, communities, and ecosystems. Beyond spills, producing tar sands oil is one of the most environmentally damaging forms of energy extraction. It involves clearing massive areas of Canada's boreal forest, one of the world's largest carbon sinks, and leaves behind toxic waste ponds that can poison nearby communities and wildlife. The refining process emits 3 to 4 times more carbon pollution than refining conventional oil. From the moment Keystone XL was proposed, it became the center of a fierce political and public battle. Environmental groups, indigenous communities, farmers, and local business owners formed coalitions to fight the project. They argued it was not just a threat to land and water, but also a symbol of doubling down on fossil fuels at a time when the world needed to shift toward cleaner energy. Environmental groups, indigenous communities, farmers, and local business owners formed coalitions to fight the project. They argued it was not just a threat to land and water, but also a symbol of doubling down on fossil fuels at a time when the world needed to shift toward cleaner energy. Some of the protests were historic. In 2011, a large civil disobedience action outside the White House resulted in more than 1,200 arrests, a rare show of scale for an environmental cause. Notable voices like the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, former President Jimmy Carter, and civil rights leader Julian Bond publicly opposed the project. Bond famously said, "This is not a pipeline to America. It's a pipeline through America," warning of the dangers if it leaked along its route. But the opposition faced a powerful opponent, the fossil fuel industry. Oil companies spent hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying politicians, especially in the lead-up to the 2014 midterm elections. In 2015, when pro-industry lawmakers gained control of Congress, one of their first moves was to push a bill approving Keystone XL. That attempt failed, but the fight wasn't over. In 2017, after winning the presidency, Donald Trump quickly resurrected the project, granting permits and touting it as a win for jobs and energy independence. This reignited both the lobbying efforts from oil companies and the protests from environmentalists. The tug-of-war continued until President Biden canceled the project's permit on his first day in office in 2021. So here we are again, more than a decade after Keystone XL first hit the headlines asking the same question. Is this really about America's energy independence, or is it a political symbol being used to rally support? So here we are again, more than a decade after Keystone XL first hit the headlines, asking the same question. Is this really about America's energy independence, or is it a political symbol being used to rally support? On paper, the idea sounds straightforward. Build a pipeline, secure a steady flow of oil from a friendly neighbor, and strengthen North America's energy position. But in reality, the path is tangled with high tariffs, environmental risks, expired permits, and companies that no longer want the job. Even if construction restarted tomorrow, it would take years before a single barrel flowed through it. Meanwhile, the energy world has changed. The United States is already one of the largest oil and gas exporters in the world. Renewable energy is growing faster than ever, and Canada has other markets it can sell to. It's no longer dependent on the United States as its primary customer. For some, Keystone XL represents progress, jobs, and energy security. For others, it's a costly step backward that locks both countries into decades of carbon-heavy energy. What's certain is that reviving this project would set off another storm of debate, one that pits economic arguments against environmental and political realities. So what do you think? Is Keystone XL the missing piece of America's energy puzzle, or is it just political theater dressed up as infrastructure? Let's continue the conversation in the comments.